So I want to say hello to everybody. My name is John Watson, and this is SNHU's CS-260, Data Structures and Algorithms. This is the first meeting we're holding, and it's actually the start of week 2, but I want to step back and go over week 1 for anybody who might be new to either Eclipse or the C++ environment to make sure that everybody has a good foundation. I'm going to answer questions, but I think as a kind of an approach, I want to go through and just review last week's assignment, and then we can take it from there if there's any questions. So in week 1, we had one assignment where we needed to install and set up the Eclipse CDT or C development tools, and then the GNU C++ compiler. I'm going to assume that everybody has that set up. There are instructions on the site, and there's also plenty of YouTube video tutorials and other places on how to set up and configure that. So for the time being, I'm going to assume that that is the case and just focus on the particular programming assignment. So one of the things you got to do first off is go to the Module 1 page in Blackboard and download these lab files. And this pattern you're going to see repeated throughout the course. When you download the lab files, they're going to be in a zip. You can, if you're in Windows, you can right-click and choose Extract. And inside of there are actually the instructions file, which is a Word document, and then a partially completed source file, which we're going to look at. So let's take a moment and look at the instructions here. The instructions, you're going to find this pattern that we use throughout the entire course, where we're using the same techniques and approaches and actually the same data files, because the focus of the course is primarily on data structures and algorithms and studying them. And so in that sense, I kind of view the programming side of it to be a little bit noise in the background and not the primary focus. And so to try to keep the focus the same and not find things changing underneath you, you're going to see this pattern of programming throughout the course. So every week you'll have a zip file to download. You're going to find a partially completed program and some data files, and you're going to follow through the tasks. And so the first thing I'm going to do is do that right now for you like you would do. So if we go to Eclipse, and by the way, I don't know if you saw this in the instructions, but one way to tell if you're kind of ready to go is in the development setup guide, we showed you a command. This is called GCC, which is the GNU C++ compiler. And you can, from any command prompt or shell prompt, you can type in GCC space -version. If you get back a response like this, then you know you've got the C++ compiler installed correctly. There's an optional feature which I'll talk about later, but it's called the GNU debugger. And you can test that with a GDB --version. That was also listed in the instructions, and we'll come back to that. It'll kind of come around full circle later after we have some code written. So per the instructions, the first thing we're going to do is create a new project. And maybe I'll just kind of show this over here to remind us. I'm going to create a new project. We're going to name it Lab 1-3. So what you want to do is choose C++ project, do not C or C/C++, just choose a straight C++ project. And here, make sure you choose Hello World. And then for your platform, it's going to be whichever compiler you have. On Windows, it'll be the MinGW, and on Mac, it's called the Mac OS X GCC. Hello World is basically a small little sample program, and I'll actually show you that. I'll cancel and show you what it is. When you run Hello World, you end up with a tiny little project, like so, a source file, and it's up and written for you already. In fact, you can compile it. Mine's all, let's do it clean. Assuming that people have had exposure to projects within IDEs before, whether it was a NetBeans or maybe Eclipse or perhaps even the Microsoft products. But when you're doing programming, you end up putting your code together into what's called a project. And a project in these tools is a way to contain settings, source files, and links, and everything you need to basically build a running application. So you'll find things like on the project menu is where you go to do things to the project, not necessarily to individual source files, but to the project. So if I do a clean, that's going to erase everything, not the source code, but it's going to erase any compiled programs. One more thing I'll do is I'm going to go and show you on disk where this is. Now I happen to put my workspace on the D drive. So if I come here, you can see Hello World. And now you notice there's kind of a pattern here. So there's a source directory and Hello World CPP, source directory and Hello World CPP there. And that's the file we're actually looking at. And there's this debug directory, which is empty at the moment. Actually, I'll leave this here so we can see it fill in. And what I'm going to do in Eclipse is I'm just going to go and compile it. There's a couple of ways to do it. You can just do project build. You can also right-click over here and choose build. And lastly, if you like the toolbar icons, there's a little hammer for building your project. So I'll go ahead and hit that. And what it's doing is taking the source code, it's analyzing it, it's parsing it, and it's turning it into machine code that you can run and execute. So this debug folder was empty, and now I've got helloworld.exe and a little source folder, which I won't get into. That's kind of deeper C++ stuff that's not important for this course. Now that the program has been built, I can run it. And I can choose this little icon up here. You could also choose the run menu. I'm going to go with this one, and I'm going to say run as local C++ app. When I do that, you're going to see down here the program ran. It displayed 3 exclamations, hello world, 3 more, and then it ended. Get this guy out of the way. And that corresponds to this line here, which is to send out to the standard output or the console output the string hello world, which we saw, and then the end line character. This console in Eclipse is a nice little tool to show you what it would be from a command line. I could actually do the same thing here myself. So I'm going to go, and this is a little trick if you don't know this. I'm going to go up here and copy this line, which is the address, and then I'm going to say D:, because I'm on a different hard drive, change directory, and then I'll paste there. And if I do in Windows, it'll be a dir. And you can see there's the debug folder. What we're looking at here is what we're seeing here, and the source folder. I'm going to change into the debug directory. Look at it again, and there's hello world. Now I'm going to just type in, because it's an exe, which is in Windows is an executable program, I'm just going to type in hello world and hit enter, and it prints right on the console. It's the same thing that you see here in Eclipse. It's just you don't have to bother opening a PowerShell or a command prompt and navigating directories by hand. You can do all this from within Eclipse. So that's a basic program, and again, the reason we're using the Hello World template is because it does a lot of pre-configuration for you. It just makes it very simple, and it also ensures that everybody's kind of doing the same thing the same way, which is kind of important for class because we want to focus on the material we're learning. So again, the instructions say make a new or file new C++ project, make sure you choose Hello World, make sure you choose your compiler, and we're going to call this lab 1-3. And if you're tempted to put spaces in between, don't. One of the things that programmers have to unlearn is, while it might be fun to put spaces in things, it oftentimes can cause lots of little unforeseen problems, and it can be kind of tedious. That's why you'll find a lot of programs and names, such as Hello World here, isn't 2 words, but 1 word, no spaces. So once we do this, we can click Next. You don't actually need to do anything. I can just go ahead and click Finish. Now I've got another folder here called Lab 1-3 with a source directory. And here I'm going to go back, go up to my workspace, and there's my folder on disk. You notice these other files, these are part of what's called the project. So these are internal settings that Eclipse uses to manage your C++ project. And there's the file has been created. And right now, because we set it a Hello World project, it does the same thing. It looks very much like the source code here. Right? In fact, they're practically identical. But now that we've done this and we've got this marker, if you will, in place, we've got this file sitting here. One of the things that we tell you to do is, actually that's the next step. The first thing you want to do is make a couple of changes. Oh, no, I was right here. Under Part G, download the starter program source, which we got from our, and I'm going to open a new window. You can see them both. I'm going to go to my downloads, lab13, and there's this file here. So what I'm going to do, notice this one is 3 KB and this one is only one little one. So this is the empty one that was created by default. We want you to replace it with our version for the assignment. Say yes, replace the file. Now come back to Eclipse, and it's always a good idea to right-click on your project and choose refresh. Let it reread stuff and clean it up. Now when we open this file, it's a lot bigger than it was before. There's a lot more going on here. In fact, when you see these squiggly lines, that's an indication that there are errors, which is on purpose. So what we did is we gave you the skeleton or the shell of a program without anything, with certain parts missing. And if we follow through on the instructions, we'll notice here, task 2 says define a data structure to hold bid information together as a single unit of storage. Elements include the title, the name of the fund, which bids are applied to, something random like vehicle ID, and amount of bid. The actual data you'll find doesn't really matter, but you notice right here there's a marker that says fix me. You'll find these throughout all of our template programs that we give you to start with, just to save some time. So if you remember from week 1 reading, I want to create a structure, which is the struct keyword. So I can say struct, I'm going to call it a bid, because I'm not very inventive or creative. And since that's what this is bids, I'm going to do that. Now I'm going to create a string, and I'm going to call it title. What else do we have? Title, fund, and blah, blah, blah. So let's do another string, fund, and a third string called vehicle. And lastly, we want to do an amount of a bid. Now remember that when we're talking about an amount, that's really monetary unit, which means it's a number that has decimal places. So we don't want to use an int, we want to use the double data type. So we'll call this something inventive like amount. As soon as I do this, now notice as I was typing this, since I've put together some legal C++ syntax, the errors are gone here. Now I've done task 2. Task 3 says declare an instance of the data structure. That you will need to declare a variable. So let's get on to the main method. I'll come back and talk to the program once we finish the writing. I kind of want to get people to focus on doing the task at hand, and see right there, fix me too. So we have a type that is called, what was the data type we used up above? It was called a bid. So we'll say bid, and I'll call it something cute like or how about the bid. So now, just like you define a double or a string, I'm defining a variable called the bid, which is of type bid, the structure. And notice when I hover over an Eclipse, it's kind of a cool, this is where these IDEs start to really shine, is they're actually, it actually knows that this is a bid, and it's going up above in the program and showing you the code that makes up a bid, which is kind of handy when you're scrolling all around and doing things. Now that we've done this, store the input values in data structure. There's a get bid method, which I skipped over. So let's go back up here and take a look at get bid for a minute. Sometimes it's helpful just to review it for a moment. So here we've got a type. Well, first off, the method has return val, so we're going to return something. And if we do this, we say Within the get bid method, you'll need to complete the prompt by filling in the tokens with appropriate variables as populate the return. Now, this method is called get bid. It has no arguments because the parentheses are empty. And so we're going to make a leap of brilliance here and assume that we're going to return a bid. Now, in this case, we're going to create a local instance of a bid, which we're going to fill in here, and then we're going to return it to whoever calls the get bid function. And let's call this sum bid. Notice as I'm filling this out, these squiggly lines go away and the code is starting to come in. So the first thing we want to do is, again, we've got this is going to send to output enter title. If you remember from Java, or especially if you took the Java class here, the IT 145, we did similar things in Java. We're doing it now in C++. This little ignore line is basically what's called flushing the buffer. It's making sure that when we start to take input from the keyboard or the console that it starts out empty. And then we have a get line function. So we're going to take line from this console and we're going to store it somewhere. Now, if you remember, our bid had a title in it. So our variable is called sum bid. So I'm going to type sum bid, hit the period, and notice it goes out to the bid structure and it shows me the fields. So I'm going to, since we're asking for title, I'm going to store that in the title, and boom, now the line's good to go. Next one, we're going to say enter fund. And let's see, what do we got here? This one's a little different, and I'll explain why in a second. This one, instead of doing this get line, we're going to just send the input directly into the variable. So this is going to be bid dot, come on, wake up. Not going to do it, oops, sum bid dot, and there we go, fund. Now the difference is, this is the simplest one. Cout sends output to the console, cin takes input from the console or the keyboard and redirects it directly into this variable. Now up here, we did a slightly different thing, and get line is something that's part of some of the built-in C libraries. What get line does is allow you to take input, including spaces, and you would imagine that the title to something might have spaces and be a much longer name, whereas a fund is going to be just a plain, simple, short, one-word string. And so there's a difference in these two ways of getting input. You can do simple pipe it into a string, or you could use the get line function or method to take some input from the input stream and store it in some bid.title. Same thing here. Actually pretty basic, not very fancy. Some bid.vehicle, and I can also start typing it, and once I get it to where I like it, I can just hit enter and it'll fill in. So there, so now we've got prompt for title stored in the structure. This structure's here. Prompt for fund, so on and so forth. Then we get down and we're already bringing in amount. Now this is one thing that's a little tricky. And if you notice, when we were looking at, and I'm going to bring it up just for a second, if we were looking at some of the handouts, in this case, the one on the primer, we made a lot of spend a lot of time talking about the data types. And one of the first things you notice about C++ is it is a much richer set of data types, which just basically means to old C++ programmers, you've got more ways to shoot yourself in the foot. So in essence, what it means is you've got some simple basic data types in Java, but when it comes especially to numerics, there are more choices there. There's int, float, double. You got signed integers, unsigned integers, signed characters, and unsigned. So the point being is that there's a lot of different data types here. And C is also C++ is also a fairly strict language, and so in order to take a string and store it in a double, whereas some of the newer languages like Java or even C# in Microsoft's .NET, they make it pretty simple. But back in the day, doing this in C and C++ was actually quite difficult. So we already had the get line to pull in a string. At this point, I've got a string variable holding a bunch of characters that were typed. Now, I want to take that string and convert it to a double. We provided a simple little routine that does that for you. It's called string to double, and you pass to it the amount and the optional character that's a symbol that's going to get stripped off, and then you store the output of that function in a variable. Now this thing, you could dig into it if you want. It's a little bit complicated. This is not uncommon for C and C++. You'll find that there's a lot of very terse, brief statements that have multiple calls to methods that do things. And this returns like ASCII to float is the ATOF function. And these are all things that are contained up here in these standard libraries. But the bottom line is, to use it, all you have to do is take a string, you pass a string in, and you get back a double, which is the magic of programming. I don't necessarily need to know the details, I just need to know how to use it. So once I get this amount, I'm going to store it in SumBid dot amount. Notice that type is a double. So this is going to take a string of characters, including a $, the period, and all of that, and strip all of that off and give you back a double data type. Now that I've filled up this SumBid, I'm going to return this to the caller. So return SumBid. And now this method is done and ready to go. After we call getBid, we're going to call and work on displayBid, which I think is a little further up. And this, of course, becomes fairly rudimentary. It's going to be a bid. And we're just going to call this, I'm going to say bid in lowercase. I'll tell you about this in a second. Title is going to be bid.title. The fund is bid.fund. Vehicle is bid.vehicle. Come on, catch up. You ever notice how once you had a computer for a while, they seem fast when you first got it, then it gets much slower as time goes on? It never can quite keep up with you. I think they do that on purpose to make you buy newer models. There. So one of the things I did intentionally was I chose different variable names. I could have used the same name, but sometimes that gets confusing, especially for people who are just starting out with the language. So here I created something called SumBid. That's the variable name of type bid. Here I called it just plain old bid, lowercase. And then down in the main method, I chose the bid. So it also kind of just illustrates or reinforces the fact that these are different variables with different pieces of memory. Now that we've got a display, and I guess I should talk about this for a second. So the display is very, very simple. So we're going to send to the output stream the string title, and then we're going to pipe in the title from the bid structure, and then the end line, which is, if you remember in Java, this would equate to a print line. Same thing for the fund and the vehicle and the bid amount. So now we have a method that can display bids. And I'm going to ignore this stuff for a minute and come back to it. Actually, I can't. So one of the things that the instructions ask you to do, but we provided most of it for you, was to display a menu with prompts, enter bid, display all bids, exit. And that's what we've got here. So we've got a choice variable, which is an integer that initially is set to 0. While it's not equal to 9, which it won't be, we're going to display menu, enter bid, display bid, exit, and then we're going to wait for a choice. Still within the while loop, we have a switch statement, which is going to do something with the choice that was just entered. If the choice is 1, enter bid, then we're going to execute this code. So for here, what we're going to do is we're going to call the getBid routine, and we're going to assign the result to some local variable, which is the bid, because that's our local variable that we have. There. Now that line is complete. And by the same token, if the user chose a 2 to display the bid, then the switch statement comes down to here, and it invokes the display bid method, and you have to give it some variable. So in this case, the variable we're going to give it is the bid. And just like that, I think we're pretty close to being done. Looks like I don't see any errors. Let's just try compiling it and see what happens. The worst it will do is yell at us. Oh, we do have some errors. What do we got here? Oh, one of the things I forgot to do, which we tell you, I think it was, is it here? I believe, is we have to go in and set some parameters. And let me just check my cheat sheet here, which you can't see on the screen. That's why presenters always look so smart, because they got stuff waiting for them to help. Here. I was thinking it didn't need this here, but I'm kind of surprised. Let's go. You have to go up here to the project folder, not the file. You go up to the project, you right click, and you go to properties. And then, if I remember correctly, we're down in here. Nope. Tool chain was set up with an NGW, which is good. And preprocessor. I was thinking it was a compiler setting. I might have to go cheat and look at one of the other instructions. No, not this one. It would have been the development environment. This lengthy thing that we followed. Here you go, create a new project. Right click, properties, C+ build, then settings, and miscellaneous. I'll put that down here. C build, and then settings. There we go. That looks familiar. And select miscellaneous. And we want to add this dash standard equals C++11. And I think I spent some time describing that in detail. It's got to do with the fact that the GCC compiler is using, when all the compiler vendors standardized, they chose a much earlier version of C++ as the default or the basic one. To the other flags, text box, repeat the same for linker, so I'm going to cheat and copy and get down to the linker, miscellaneous. I think that'll go there. And let's see if these things go away. Do a clean. Let's see what it's saying. Or the question mark token. Am I missing a question mark? That's not it. Get these two.
This is one of those times when I clean my project in Eclipse.
Yeah, normally, as I did, I don't know if you saw me do that. I just went through it kind of quick. I moved through it kind of quick, but it did not show that. I thought that this first project didn't have any special settings, but oh, here's an idea. Maybe I should save the project, save the file, clean it again, and then we'll try a build. Oh, stupid pilot error. I thought we didn't need to do that, but that's why I didn't mention the settings. The first one was so simple, it didn't have any special settings. Later projects, you will have to go in and set. You will have to follow these instructions each time to set up the compiler, because we're going to use newer things. What do we got here? A typo? Oh, I forgot. I thought I had a forward declaration. Nope. This is a case for a little C++ cheating because I happen to know this trick. What you can do, once again through the magic of playing with things, I'm going to paste in this little bit of code. In C++, everything has to be declared before it can be used. And the error, let me just comment this out so I can show you what I did. With this commented out, it's reporting an error here because I'm making a call to something called string to double. So this line of code here is calling string to double, but string to double isn't until further down in the source code, and it cannot find it. And so one way to do it would be to rearrange the order of things, putting it up above so it can find it. I don't personally like doing that because I like to keep things in kind of an alphabetical order or somewhat logical order, to me at least. And so in C++, what you can do is you can declare something called string to double. So we're really just defining the method called string to double. It's going to take a string and a character, and it's going to return a double data type. Now, once I put this forward declaration in, the compiler knew where to find it. And so after I save, give Eclipse a second, and this error should go away. If not, we'll just compile it. And now the error is gone, and the program is compiled. And there we have a simple little thing. Now, when it comes to executing the program, it's going to ask for a bid. So I'm going to click Run, and I want to choose, I'm on this project, and I'm going to say run this as a local C++ app. And there's a console. Enter bid. Notice the menu looks like what the prompt here is asking you to show. Menu, enter bid, display bid, exit. And we'll try exit first. Sure enough, it said goodbye, and it ended. So let's go look here. Let's get this stuff out of the way. And we'll bring this up from the bottom. There it is. Nope, wrong one. This guy. There we go. It said goodbye. And notice within the while loop, we had a switch statement that checked for 1 and 2. If not, then it came out, and now choice will equal 9 because that's what I input. It falls out and says goodbye, and then it exits back to the operating system. And again, if I wanted to get fancy, I could even do this from, I'm going to go up, parent directory, and there's my lab. Oops. Change directory to lab. And I'll be lazy Windows, I don't have to worry about case. And we'll go into the debug directory. And there's lab1-3.exe. I can type this in here, lab1-3. When I hit enter, you notice even in the console I'm getting it, and I can choose exit, or I could choose to display something. Since we're sitting here, I'm going to head to it. Oh, here's one. Let's say Hoover Steam Vac General. I can do this. Let's run this again. This is a trick, by the way, if you didn't know. You can use the up arrow on your keyboard to bring back the last command. You can actually scroll up and down through your commands, so you don't have to type them always or remember them. I'm going to run the program. I'm going to choose 1 to enter a bid. And it's coming back and saying title. Now, if I go look here, follow the logic through. We displayed the menu. I typed a 1. So in the switch statement, the case 1 was true, so it called get bid, which means it comes up to here and executes the get bid. So it created a local variable, displayed enter title, and now it's sitting here on this get line. And I'm going to type in Hoover Steam Vac. The fund is general. No vehicle, we'll ignore that, and I'm going to put in an amount of 27.00. And it did. Now I can choose display bid. So let's see what happened. We took in this input, it created and filled in the structure sum bid, and then it returned it to the caller. Now this was called from the main method. So down here, the result of get bid, which is that sum bid struct, got copied into the bid here. So basically we copied what was in the get bid method and stored it. We do that this way so that you can then go back to your menu and call display bid, and we can display that bid. And I'm going to show you something cool in a moment. So now we're sitting here. I'm going to choose display bid, and it should call the display bid method, which will simply display some output and just return. And you can see right there, title Hoover Steamvac, fund general, vehicle nothing, bid amount 27, just like the doctor ordered right here. So I've done a lot of talking. Any questions? Anything I went over too fast? I need to go back and go over a little slower. I guess not. You can always interrupt me. One of the things I want to do back here on this development installation guide is we talked about this debugger. And I didn't go into a lot of detail on how to set it up, but I'm going to show it in action. And this is where it really gets kind of cool. Let's see, we'll go let's do it down here. I'm going to set a breakpoint on this line. So I can put my cursor here, right click, and choose, where's my toggle breakpoint? Toggle breakpoint. I always move it. Gosh. Too many IDs, too many differences. There we go. Control-Shift-B. So I'm going to say toggle breakpoint. What I did was I noticed there's a little blue marker there. With the debugger, what we're saying is when the program is running and you get to this point, I want you to stop. And actually, I'm going to put one right here too. I can do Control-Shift-B, and there's our little marker. Now, instead of doing just a simple run, we're going to say debug. So it's still on this menu or under here. If it was a run menu, instead of choosing run, you choose debug. I happen to like saving a little bit. I'm going to say debug as local C++ app. And it's going to chug along, and it's warning me that it's going to change the look and feel of the IDE while it's running. And right now, when you start the debugger, it starts on the very first line and it stops. And what's really amazing about debuggers, if you've never used them, is that you've got all these variable windows. So you're watching the program while it's running in memory. Right now, the program is stopped on this line, and you can examine your program kind of like live in memory while it's executing. And notice choice is an integer variable, and there's something called the bid right here, and its data type is bid, and I can expand it, and it knows there's a title, which is a string, fund, vehicle, and a double, which has some strange number. And this also kind of shows you, and actually the choice had a strange number. These things have not been assigned yet, so they're pointing to some part of memory which has who knows what in it. And now up here on your debugger line, you've got some commands. You can step, I believe it's here. You can step into, step over. I'm sitting on this line. I'm going to do the step over, which is F6. Now notice this line is highlighted, and there's a bid. I'm going to do one more step, and watch what happens over here to this variable, because now we're going to assign 0 to the int. Bam. And notice it highlighted it quickly. So now the choice variable equals 0. We're saying while it's not 9, we're going to step. Now, you can do this all day long and step through your code and watch it run. It beats the heck out of staring at your code trying to figure out what it's doing. I'm just going to head and keep running. I'm going to hit resume. So now the debugger is just going to run and wait. Oops, I forgot about this. There's a bug. One of the things they talked about in figures is, let's see if I can find this. I believe, where did I say it? This Stack Overflow post, okay. For some reason, the Eclipse debugger has a little problem with buffering output. Where was it? Here. I'm going to click this link, and we'll launch another browser here. And what they're telling you is Basically, they're telling you it's got to do with debugging, buffering. So the short answer is if I create a text file called .gdb.init and I say set new console on. So first off, I'm going to do this, copy it, go back to my window. This is stopped. I'm going to go to my lab. Nope, that's the downloads here. And I want to create another file. So right click, new text file, and we're going to name it. I'll paste, oops, I forgot about this stupid Windows, GDB init. It doesn't like it because that sees the dot as a file name. I'm actually happen to be using a text file called Notepad++. See if I can remember this. Let's try editing this. And what did the instructions say? It said to add the following line without quotes. Set new console on. Paste it in here. Oops, that didn't work. And buffers are copy, paste. Now I'm going to do a save as, see if I can sneak it this way. Change it to .gdb init. Ha, tricked it. There, so using a text editor, I created a file called gdb init. I can delete this guy. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and restart Eclipse to make sure. The effect, if this works, the effect of what I did was, where am I? Over here. Basically, it's a file that tells Eclipse that we want to use the console output and not use the built-in window. It's okay when you're running code, but when you're debugging and stopping and starting and rendering to the screen and pausing, the buffering mechanism in Eclipse tends to get a little confused. This reminds me, Eclipse has a feature that you may see called perspectives. And you notice it up here in the corner. So see, that's a debug perspective. That's a C perspective. And watch what happens. I can switch back and forth. So I can have almost like two desktops or two modes for what I'm looking and working. So here's my programming mode. And then here's my debugging mode, or perspective is the Eclipse term. So now that we've got this, I am going to try to debug this again. Hello world. Oops. What happened was I wasn't clicked in here. I didn't have this file selected, so it didn't know what I wanted to debug. So by clicking into here, I can go and choose this. Now you notice something's going to happen here. Everything works out, bingo. We got this launch, and then there's this little window here. It popped up a command window. So instead of using the built-in console to see the output and input are going to be directed in a separate command window. And it has to do that so the debugger doesn't interfere with the screen I/O. So we're going to do what we did before. We're going to step over. Actually, I'm going to resume. And if life is good. Now, at this point, it says it's running. Nothing's going on. I don't see anything here. But if I go back to my console window, voila. So I'm going to say enter bid. Like before, what did we say? It was Hoover something? Hoover Steam Vac. Hoover Steam Vac? Oh, what happened? If you remember, I put a breakpoint in. So at this point, this window is frozen, and the debugger comes along and it did what I asked it. It did a breakpoint. Because remember, I had that little dot. It stopped right there. But here's what's really, really cool. Remember, our local variable is called SumBid, and we can see it up here in the Variables tab. And if I open up SumBid, there's a title, fund, and we just input a title and stored it here. I could do this and hover, and it shows you, or I could display it. Now, the only thing is strings are kind of a little funky because they're actually, we think of strings as being something simple, but they're actually a very complex data type. That involves a lot of memory underneath the covers. And so looking at a string is sometimes hard. I think if I go here There you go. You see these little ASCII characters? There it is. Hoover, something, steam back. That's basically the string in memory. It's not that interesting, but I wanted to show you how we're able to step through it. Now remember that I have another breakpoint down here just before we return. I'm going to click resume. At this point, I go back to there, and it continues, and it says enter fund. I think we said general, and the vehicle we left blank, and I'm going to choose $29.50, 59 cents. Now I hit enter. The window's flashing because the debugger came back and hit a breakpoint. And now when I hover over some bid, you can see that we've got some information. Oops. Here. Notice the amount is $29.59, the value that I entered. Go back up here. I can close title, and there's the value. So that's what a debugger can do, which is really very, very cool and very powerful when you're trying to figure out why your program isn't working. I believe in the instructions, we said that that was an optional thing. Remember, I install Eclipse. Optional. The GNU debugger is no longer automatically installed. You need to install it yourself. So if you didn't, if you're on Mac and you didn't install it, I would highly recommend you go back and install it because a debugger is super, super helpful. Let this guy keep running. I'm going to choose display bid. And since there's no breakpoints or anything like that, it just continues running. And then we exit. And now remember, we're in this debug perspective or view. We can switch back. You can also close this. If you're kind of done with it and you're not going to debug, you can right click, say close, and there's just the one. So that was lab exercise 1 in a nutshell. Once again, if there's any questions, now's the time to ask them. I'm not seeing any yet. One of the things I'll do is mention a little further. For Module 2, we're going to do something similar, and I just want to kind of stress that. I go to Module 2 here, download the lab files. I think I got that. And then, actually, let's do this. Yeah. If I can find it, I'll open it up. I actually have it already opened on my computer. Just give me a second. Go look at it. Here's another cheat. Got another window here. Lab 2 is a little more interesting because we're going to step up the game by introducing things like file I/O and processing. So for Lab 2, where am I? Here. Lab 2.1. Here's the instructions. We're actually going to use these CSV files. This one's going to go a little further. We're going to change the logic from week 1, which we just went through and did. So instead of enter a bid, load bids, we got load bids and then display all. And so the focus is going to be, one of the focuses is going to be on loading the bids. And if we look at this template program, let me go here. You can see there's a fix. We got a reference of C++, a CSV parser library. One of the things we did was we give you a C++ parser library, which you'll notice is here. I'll come back to that in a minute. Funny enough, here's that forward declaration and the struct that we just did. There's a display bid. We changed the output a little to get fancy. We have a get bid now. Kind of like before, it's already been filled in. So if you didn't do exercise 1 and you were to look at exercise 2, you'd probably be able to, I don't want to say cheat, let's say get it going and working pretty quickly. How's that? But we have this new method called load bids. And what this is all about is, we go back to these C++ files, Should remember right, we're here, oh, here. EBIT monthly sales and EBIT monthly sales just for December. These are two files. Here's what they look like. They're comma separated, and you notice they've got, oops, that's a little big. These bids here. So instead of typing input over and over and over, you think I just made up the Hoover Steam Vac for $27? That was actually line 1. We're going to use some file I/O to read this comma separated file and store the values into a structure called a vector, which you'll read about in this week's stuff, this week's reading assignment. So here's the method. If we go to the bottom, as I said before, you're going to see some of the same things over and over and over. The menu is a little more advanced. There's a place to define a vector. And when you choose number 2, it's going to want to go and execute this load bids routine. Now this thing is partially filled out for you, and it's already got the command to include the parser and display it. Here we've got a loop. What we're going to do is basically loop over the variable that's filled in called this parser, this file, and we're going to store these things into the vector that we're creating. So that's basically the challenge for this week is, like I said, we step up the game a little. We're going to be, here's my notes. The focus here is going to be using the CSV parser routine and loading the bids. And then when you call display, it's actually going to be displaying, here's display up here. We're going to display, that's a single bid. What did I do for display? So we have a loop. So we're going to loop over the vector of all the bids we loaded and display them one at a time by calling display bid. Another aspect that we added just to get you prepared for dealing with algorithms is the fact that we're going to use timing. So one of the things it'll tell you to do towards the end is to use timers. And if you remember in the C++ primer, this guy here, where we had a lot of the basics, there's a little section or a page devoted to some pretty fundamental rudimentary timing. And here's a simple technique. If you include the time library that's part of the C++ standard runtime, then you can define something called ticks of type clock_t. You can initialize it. So basically what this is, this represents what's called the clock ticks of your processor. So the idea for simple basic timing is to create an instance and you set it to what the clock currently has. You do your code, and at the end, you call clock again. So it's going to be some larger value minus the earlier value you recorded, the difference being the ticks. And there's a this little formula. So we actually give you this code. And so when you see this over here, 7B and 7C, initialize the timer and calculate the elapsed time. All you really need to do is put this code into your program, and you will be able to display output in actual seconds. It'll convert it to seconds. So if there's no other questions, or there's no questions, then I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll make it available to everybody. And hopefully this has been a help to everyone. And if we need to hold another meeting next week, I'm happy to do so, as long as it's after I'm on vacation till Tuesday. So either probably Thursday night would be a good night. If we we're going to do it again, I would do it next Thursday. Thank everybody for attending, and I hope that you got something out of it.
It was good. Thanks.
You're welcome.